Hi everyone, welcome back to our next video. Today we're going to meet Brenda.
Hello.
Who is a fairly new full-time RVer.
Yes.
And Brenda lives in a beautiful, really beautiful Scamp fifth wheel. And those aren't real common, are they, the fifth wheels?
No, they're not. There's a few of them that are scattered around if a person should want to try to locate one, but they're not as plentiful as the standard Scamps and like the Casitas and stuff like that.
Right. So this will be two videos. This will be the first one. We're going to do the interview, and then we'll do a second one where we go inside and look around, so they're not quite so long. So Brenda, let's get to know you a little bit, if that's okay.
Yep, that's fine.
So how did you end up being a full-time RVer on wheels?
Oh my goodness, that's a loaded question. When I was a little girl, my grandparents would take us out traveling. Every summer we would go someplace for a couple weeks. Usually it was a national park, but it was to go see different parts of the country. And I found that that was better than Christmas. You know, it was something I always looked forward to. And in fact, as I got older, I used to, this is dorky, but I would go through map books and I would look at, you know, different mountain ranges and passes and things that sounded exotic. And I thought, gee, I wish I could go do more things like that. But society, you know, tells you that in order to travel, unless you can squeak a week or two here or there, you know, you have to wait, do a job that's maybe you like it, maybe you don't, for 40 years, and then you retire, and then you have to cough up hundreds of thousands of dollars, you know, for the Class A. This is just the stereotypical thing that people think. And so I thought, well, where am I going to cough up all this money? Where am I going to cough up the time? I'm not happy doing the same thing for 40 years to build up enough of a retirement fund to go do this stuff. And so the wheels started turning about different ways I could accomplish things. This is not my first foray into this. There were a few things that I did kind of ahead of time. I think a person either like to travel or you don't. It suits you or it doesn't.
Apparently it suits you.
Yes, it suits me. I dabbled in this just a little bit with what I told you about. My dad had some land up north, you know, up on the Minnesota border, and we had a little pop-up camper and the canvas was failing on it, and I thought, I wonder if I could rip the canvas off this, put hard sides on it, drag it up there and set it. There was a cement slab in an old garage, and I thought I could set that on this cement slab. So that's exactly what we did. Tore the canvas off of it, built hard sides for it, put log siding on the outside, knotty pine on the inside, and this was done with a camper. So now I have this tiny log cabin, and it's up in, you know, some property, and it was wonderful. I actually plotted about, gee, I wonder how I could, you know, live in this thing. I really like this. But the conditions up there are quite harsh. You know, it gets to be 40 below, pretty common, and deep snow, and there were some, you know, just logistical issues with trying to pull that off at that time. So taking that one step further, my grandpa, who also gave me a love of traveling, was a heavy equipment operator for Coochin County in Minnesota. And so maybe there was a little bit of a genetic thing there where I was like, I like things with motors. You know, I was played on snowmobiles and three-wheelers and things when I was a kid. So I got into trucking. And that, you're traveling all around and living in a very small space. In my case, you know, I spent years living, you know, in the sleeper of a Peterbilt and a Kenworth. And so the drawback to that, it's very grueling hours. I was solo, you know, I did everything by myself. A lot of females go out as team, I'm solo. So very, very long hours. And as far as the traveling goes, you are driving around, but they're not always necessarily sending you into the nice part of town with the loads and stuff that you have to do. But it's somewhat related to this.
I think it's very related.
And I wanted to, you know, take this whole picture of things and enhance it and come out and do this. But for the longest time, you don't know how. And you're stuck in this mindset of what society tells you, that I have to wait until I'm 65, if I make it that long.
Right.
I was telling you before, you know, my grandpa dropped dead of a heart attack, probably. I'm thinking he was due to retire in 3 months. It was just a you know, matter of short months time span, and he didn't make it. And he enjoyed his job, so, you know, he had that much going for him. So it was just but it was a factor that he wanted to do this and didn't really get a chance to do it. And I thought, well, maybe I can do it.
If you put off till tomorrow, living today, one day you may not have another day to go.
Exactly. Go now.
Right.
There's no reason you can't do it. It's just that people, it's sort of a conditioned thought that you have to wait and that you have to play the game a certain way. And so sometimes it takes a little bit of thought and trial and error to break free and figure out how to make it happen.
So you just kind of hated the idea of the rat race job where you worked the rest of your life, and so you got into trucking, which was kind of a break from that.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. It was another skill I could add. I've found that it's useful to know how to do several things if you want to come out and travel and sort of live this way. If you have several different skills, it helps you in being able to kind of find work no matter where you go, if you have several things that you know how to do.
And so how are you supporting yourself now? You're on the road, so how are you supporting yourself?
Well, I currently do seasonal work, which suits me well. I like to shift up what I'm doing from time to time, so for me, seasonal is great. And I am currently a guard, so I do security for different national parks. I've done it for Glacier, and this summer I'm going to go up and do it for Yellowstone. So this job I'm actually looking forward to. There have been very few through the years that I'm actually like, oh yes, I want to go and do this. And so this is one of those things that I think sounds like fun to do. So
that's another example of having multiple skills. You're not only just a truck driver, but you're a security guard as well.
Correct.
And that must take some kind of certification?
Well, in Rapid City they require security to be licensed, and I had to get the concealed carry and some different things like that. So there was a little bit of paperwork involved with that, and then obviously with trucking I have the Class A, so with multiple endorsements, so I can run motor coach. Or my niche actually was extreme driving when I got into this further after I got out of the road, or over the road, excuse me. So I do that, and I also do administrative computer type stuff. So several different things I can do.
So the more skills you have, the more likely you are to be employed when and where you want to be.
Correct. It helps. I mean, if you have one thing you do really well and you can jump around and find work like that, that's great. But, if you're kind of like, well, I feel like I need more, having some extra things that you can do is always helpful.
So how did you end up with the Scamp? What was your process of deciding what you wanted to live in full time?
Oh goodness. Well, at the time, this sort of started with the HHR that I had. That was the only vehicle at the time that I had, and I couldn't afford, to just go change that up, and it was serving the need. But I thought, gee, it would sure be nice if I could pull something with this. Normally, you do not associate HHRs and towing. They have like a 1,000-pound limit. So I was poking around, and I happened to stumble across tiny Scamps, 13-foot fiberglass, and they weighed about 1,000 pounds, give or take. If you could find an older one without the fridge and without the air conditioning, all that adds weight. I happened to find a vintage Scamp that had none of those things. It had a stove, and that was about it. So it really was, about 1,000 pounds, and the wheels started turning. And so to save money, I ordered a hitch from Amazon, had it shipped to the house, and my daughter and I wrestled that on the car and got the wiring all hooked up, and then I chased off to Minnesota and I bought this Scamp from a private party in Minnesota. And so that's sort of how it started. That was the Scamp. I had the Scamp because that was the only thing, that was the only standing camper that my HHR could pull. So I ended up using that, to go up to Glacier Park and do some of the seasonal work up there as security. And
you were in it for about 6 months then?
That season up there ended up being a little shorter because the weather up in northern Montana only allows for the park to be open kind of a shorter time span. And that particular year we had the Reynolds Creek wildfire. It was stationed at Rising Sun. And we had the Reynolds Creek wildfire burnt us out. I was the evacuating officer, helping get everybody out of the property. and the Park Service decided that they were going to close Rising Sun early. So I was probably about a month or two short of the actual time that I was originally going to spend up there. But on average, it varies from park to park. Yellowstone is going to be 6 months, which for me, that's great. That's a pretty good time span for a job like this. The others can go anywhere from a couple months to 4, 5, or 6 months, depending, especially the northern parks.
And so you really liked it being in this camp for the 4 or 5 months you were in it?
Oh, yeah, we were actually very comfortable. There were a few things that cropped up that you end up dealing with. But I had the kitty, and there was me, and we were actually really comfortable in it. At that time, I had picked up a 95 GMC Vandura that I pulled it up there with. So I used the van to store a few things, and then the rest was in the Scamp. But I didn't miss what I didn't have for the most part. We were actually, it was very comfortable. Some of the problems that came up, I got creative and dealt with them. How you deal with things is going to depend on what your particular situation is. Like if you're working seasonally with the parks and you have an RV, they will typically put you in an RV site, so you're going to have hookups and things. So that's part of the method. I dealt with some of the things that came up. The Scamp didn't have a fridge. The nearest grocery store where you weren't paying 6 times the amount for anything was like 60 miles away. Being able to stock up on stuff is useful, and I had no fridge, and I thought, what am I going to do? So what I did is I just had the $99 dorm fridge that works off a plug-in shipped in there, and I stuck that on the couch, and boy, that was wonderful. And I had plug-ins, so I could get away with doing that. If you're just running on solar and boondocking, that's not going to work. But for me, it did work. So that was a problem that was, poof, okay, I didn't have this, now I have it, problem solved. And I did the same thing with an air conditioner as well. It ended up getting 90 degrees plus up there, and that's not normally something you're going to associate with Glacier Park. So we're sitting there sweltering, and I thought, boy, this is miserable. And I ran fans, and I used Reflectix, to try to block the windows and stuff. And finally, I thought, how can I get this problem taken care of? So what I ended up doing was doing some measurements, and I found out that if I took out, I think it's pronounced J-Luce, the windows, the kind of open flap windows, if I took one of those panes out, I could fit a teeny tiny air conditioner in that trailer. So that's what I did. I popped the window pane out, and I sat at 11 o'clock at night. I ran to Kalispell, and I picked up the tiny air conditioner, and I picked up a few materials, and I came back, and at 11 o'clock at night, I built a little cantilever shelf that would hang off the side of the trailer, and I popped the air conditioner in there, and I plugged that in. Oh, it was wonderful. Now we had, air conditioner on this little tiny vintage Scamp, and it was kind of a pain in the rear end whenever you had to move, but it did take care of an immediate problem. So the point I want to make is, even if you have something that maybe doesn't have all these amenities, if you want to badly enough, there's always a way to try to solve different problems and issues that come up, even if you don't start out of the gate with them.
That was how my first time I moved into a van. It was just little problem after little problem.
And you sort of solve them as they come up, and until, poof, you have a rig, that does pretty much what you wanted it to do.
Right.
So that was sort of my foray into the Scamp world, and I really liked it. And it was a 1978, so they didn't have, this is called a deluxe. So, it's got the wooden stuff in, and 1978's only came standard, so everything is fiberglass. The cabinets were fiberglass, and this one was rehabbed, which means that the previous owner had gone through and redid the interior. It was gorgeous. It was a cute little camper, and I liked the build quality on it, and it was lightweight. And
how much is your fifth wheel?
The fifth wheel is probably about 2,600 pounds dry, give or take, and it's going to depend on what sort of, if you've got the big fridge that weighs more, and if you have the oven that weighs more, and, they can come in different configurations. But this one, I guess that I think it's probably sitting at around 2,600 dry.
And what are you towing it with?
I am just towing it with a half-ton Silverado extended cab. It's got the 5.3 liter engine in it. These campers were actually designed to be towed by mid-sized trucks like Frontiers, the Tacomas, you know, not a full-size truck. This has what they call a 3-inch lift on the axle, and the later models, most of them, Scamp has already just put the lift on the axle, and the purpose of that was so that it can be towed by the full-size truck. So these were actually designed to be towed by smaller trucks. So that's sort of a little bit of backstory with them. They're lightweight. You know, it continued with the theme of having something lightweight. I did not want a... I really love the giant fifth wheels, and they're gorgeous. You go in them, you know, and so they have the Korean counters, and they'll have little ceiling fans, and, you know, they're really beautiful. But you require, you know, big diesel dually to pull a lot of those, and then, whoof, you have no fuel mileage, and it's this great big honking thing. And so this was maneuverable and small, more affordable, and I could pull it with just a regular truck.
Yeah, it's ideal, and as we'll see when we go inside, it's beautiful.
It's a gorgeous. I don't feel like I miss anything with this camper. It's just, it's in a compact package that I can manage for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I can tow it with my vehicle of choice, which is a truck. So it worked out well in that regard. I had already had the experience with Scamp with the little 13-foot, you know, and I liked it. So I thought, well, okay, I'll go a little bit bigger. And these are more unusual. I don't know what's with me. I just kind of gravitate towards more oddball things. So it worked well.
Yeah, you don't see a lot of the fifth wheel Scamps. They're out there, but not common.
No, you see a lot of, there's the regular fiberglass, you know, the casitas and stuff are far more uncommon. In fact, a casita was my backup choice. You know, I was kind of torn between, did I want to do a casita or did I want to do the Scamp fifth wheel?
And does Scamp still make the fifth wheel?
Yes, they do.
They still today?
They still do.
Good. And so it's an option. And if you got a light truck, it really, like a half-ton, or even smaller, it really is one of the better options.
It is. It is. It works well if you like to, you know, keep the truck set up or whatever. And part of that was I wanted four-wheel drive. I came from up north where having four-wheel drive is useful, blizzards, things like that. And the bigger, the lift on the axle so that I could maybe get in and out of some places without worrying about getting stuck. Being, you know, solo female, I don't want to, you know, go back in the Tules and then find myself stuck and, you know, there you are and none of the road services will come and come and pull you out because you're too far back there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You pay a lot of money to get out of that stuck.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
whoever finally you get.
Well, when this thing was a trial by fire when I first got it, too, I picked it up, you know, in November. Scamp Factory is in Minnesota, and this is used, but the Scamp Factory happened to have it. You know, I called about a hitch, and they were like, come buy the one we have, you know, the Scamp we have. And so it ended up that I went and bought this directly from Scamp. And so Minnesota in November, you're dealing with, you know, blizzards and junk like that. So I took the thing to some BLM land that was outside of Sturgis. Most people don't know there's some BLM land there, and there is. And in the winter, camping there is free because they don't do a thing with it. They don't come in, they don't clear it, they don't, you're on your own if you go in there, but it's free. So I went there and, you know, poof, blizzard. I look out the window and, you know, the snow is like this up to the axles. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to, you know, how am I going to get out of here? And I was like, wait, I have four-wheel drive. And so I was able to pop the truck into four-wheel drive and it pulled the camper out like the snow wasn't there. So paid off. You know, I'd have been in a world of hurt if I'd have had a regular.
You sure would have. You weren't coming out.
Right.
The weight on the rear wheels probably tremendously helped. Of the tongue.
Right. Yeah. The hitch weight on these, usually for reference or anybody that's thinking about it, is around 500 pounds. So that's what the weight is on the hitch. It's a special hitch that goes in the back of the truck. You don't pull these. It's not a standard fifth wheel hitch. It's like a modified gooseneck. So it's an elevated ball hitch, essentially.
Very cool. And so, what do you think so far? Are you glad you did this?
Oh, I haven't thought twice since I took off with it. I don't regret in the least having did it the way that I did. So I can clarify for everybody, I'm not loaded. I traded a house to do this. You know, this is my house now. So I kind of gave up the sticks and bricks that I had for a smaller mobile version, is essentially what I did. And no, I don't regret it at all.
So you plan to do this for the rest of your life?
Yes.
This is the life for you.
It is. Oh, absolutely. This was, in fact, that was part of the reason I chose the camper that I did, is because they have a pretty good reputation for longevity. And I figured that none of us knows how long we're going to be around, but that this could very well last me for the rest of my life. I might have to switch out tow vehicle.
Almost,
the camper,
yeah.
you know, but the camper itself can last, and so that's kind of what I was looking for.
There's really not a whole lot to go wrong with fifth wheel.
No, just basic, you know, the basic stuff that can go out of the campers, you know, and you
Right.
replace
You just
components like you do anything else, but
Right.
for the most part it's pretty simple. That was another thing that I liked about this particular style. Whether it's Scamp or Casita, they both are on the same principle with the molded fiberglass. They're pretty simple. So if something goes wrong, you can address it without, you know, too much grief. And you don't really have to worry about the rot factor.
right. No, they basically just cannot leak.
Right, right. There are, sometimes the gel coat can get little pinholes in some of the older models, and so, you know, and people are like, well, they're leak proof, and then they get one, and then they're like, well, what is this? Because you might see a little tiny wet spot on the inside of the camper, because I went through that with the 78 that I had, and all that is, it's sometimes the gel coat can get pinholes. You can deal with that pretty easily. It's not a big major
Right.
It's not a big major issue, but, you know, just to be completely upfront about, you know, these have their own little weird quirks like anything else does, but overall they're pretty solid.
But it's nothing like an RV where you are constantly worried about leaks on the roof.
Correct. Yes. No, this is not in that
leaks.
caliber with those kinds of problems. So,
Right.
you know, this is made two pieces. That belly band is where the two halves come together, and that's about the only seam.
Right.
So,
Yeah. So, what would be your final words to our listeners who are there? Most of the people who watch my videos are still in homes. They're dreaming. They're longing for this life. Do you have any message for them?
oh, it can be done. If I can do this, I'm not retired. I don't have any sort of supplemental income. I have nothing. My trick was to get rid of the debt, and then I made the conscious decision to trade the house to do this. You know, sometimes if you want to have it all, that might be a little bit more difficult to pull it off.
Yes.
But I made the decision that this was the way that I wanted to go, and I found a way that I could provide employment for myself. It can be done. It's just you have to do a little bit of digging. You have to ignore everybody that tells you you're crazy or you can't do it, and just go looking. If, you know, you search, you will find an answer that works for you. And then be patient. It took a few years to pull this off. So, you know, just with fine details and figuring out how I wanted to do it.
And as a woman, a lot of people must have been very fearful for you and said, "Oh, you'll be hurt. You know, it's too unsafe. Don't do it. Too risky." Have you found a lot of problems with it as a single solo woman?
Oh, heavens, no. In fact, I went through this with trucking because people were worried about, you know, a person being harassed. And a lot of this is common sense and mindset. If you don't have the mindset of being a victim, you're probably not going to be one. And if you're just aware of your surroundings and you are paying attention to what you're doing, I haven't had any problems. I actually had a friend of mine chew me out that I'm an armed guard, you know, I conceal carry. And he's like, why don't you have that everywhere with you? And I was like, well, I don't need it. I don't have the, you know, the mindset of I'm going to be a victim. It's not on my radar. Keep it off your radar. That helps a lot.
It does.
You know?
Yeah. I think you attract it.
Exactly.
I don't, you know, not in a Looney Tune woo-woo kind of way. It just seems to happen. If you are expecting it, that it's kind of going to happen.
Exactly, exactly. So keep it off your radar. You know, just be aware of what you're doing. That's helpful. You know, if something looks safe or looks unsafe or feels unsafe, leave. That's the beauty of having something mobile.
Right. You live on wheels.
Right. I have this set up. I can be out of here in, 20, 30 minutes, boom, gone. And that includes, packing everything down inside so it's not rattling around and hooking up and going. Poof, I'm gone. If something feels unsafe, you're gone. And that's with the truck unhitched. If I'm all hooked up, I can be out of here much faster, if something were to come up. So you always leave yourself an out and, don't think fearfully.
Right. Well, Brenda, thank you so much for sharing your new home with us and your life with us. I think we've learned a lot of good lessons. And would you mind if we took a look inside your new home?
No, that would be just fine.
Okay, let's take a look.
All right, sounds good.